When I was 10 years old, my elementary school introduced a project called the Ellis Island Project, a 2-month-long exploration into our family heritage that culminated in an event known as Ellis Island Day. For context, the first people in my family to immigrate to the United States were my parents, my Vietnamese refugee immigrant parents. Now, a portion of Ellis Island Day was set aside so that we could share the food of our people with our classmates. Of course, like any good child of immigrants, I was obsessed with food at a young age. So when I heard that I could share my favorite snack with my friends in school, I was, for lack of a better term, stoked. Immediately, I thought of banh bot lok. Banh bot lok is a soft, sticky, delicate tapioca dumpling stuffed with pork and shrimp, a perfect combination of savory, sweet, and peppery, packed with umami, and all carefully wrapped and steamed in a banana leaf. Look, I know you may be drooling, but I need you for a bit longer, so please stay with me. The way that I've always preferred banh bot lok is by snacking on them, unwrapping them one by one, and dipping them in a salty, spicy mixture of Thai bird chilies and fish sauce. I can easily remember knocking back an entire plate in an hour of watching the original Teen Titans after school. It came time for me to share on the day of. I looked to my peers to see if my excitement would be reciprocated. Instead, I was met with a sea of scrunched noses, confused looks, audible gagging, and someone saying, "Oh my God, what's that smell?" The realization that no one wanted anything to do with my favorite childhood snack set in like a flash flood. This painfully lingering moment was the first time I learned that food is inextricably linked with the stories of people, including my own. Reflecting back on the brutal moments I was faced with my identity in the elementary school cafeteria, I realized that Ellis Island Day marked the first time I began to whitewash myself out of survival and strip away any aspect of myself that revealed my otherness, which is a sentiment that I believe those with their own lunchbox stories can empathize with. Today, I'm faced with an onslaught of photos and videos of my peers of all backgrounds, eating pho, boba, Korean barbecue, and dim sum. I'm 21 years old, and in my short lifetime, I've seen the same culture go from ingraining a generation of immigrant kids with lunchbox stories to glorifying the food that we grew up with on their Instagram stories. I don't know about my fellow lunchbox story generation in the crowd, but to be frank, I have identity whiplash. I went from stripping away any part of myself that revealed I had foreign parents to being asked for Viet restaurant recommendations every other week. Now, more than ever, I'm being faced with my identity and asked to represent my culture. Since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, I've seen countless stories of people that look like my family and do things like my family. Asians have been thrust into the spotlight of US culture in an all too familiar fashion. Whether it's elderly Asian women that look too much like my Bang Wai or Benoy being brutalized on the street, or Asian stories winning Oscars for the first time, America's perception of my identity and my community seems mixed at best. And this perception has seeped into the way that I carry myself, making me feel as though I'm out of reach of my own identity. Across all of this, what I find most apparent is that I feel as though I cannot share in either the successes or the sorrows of my people. We've all heard of imposter syndrome, right? That all too familiar, debilitating feeling that we're not up to the caliber of our peers around us, making us feel as though we don't belong. Well, I believe there's a version of imposter syndrome that's much more stubborn, underlying, and sinister than what we traditionally think of. A slow, persistent burn, if you will. You see, I felt and still feel like an imposter in my own identity, in my own skin, and as a representative of the Vietnamese community. I still have to practice ordering simple food items at Vietnamese restaurants. I've never been to a Vietnamese Student Association meeting, not because I'm busy, like I tell my parents, but because I feel like I'm not Vietnamese enough to go. I felt uncomfortable the entire time at a Stop Asian Hate protest, questioning whether I deserved to take up space at all. And I never had a full conversation with either of my grandfathers before they passed away. Now, in my pursuit of a cure for this devious, ever-present version of imposter syndrome, I turned to the one thing I know best: food. Earlier, I said, like any good child of immigrants, I was obsessed with food at a young age. Even after Ellis Island Day, I continued to learn everything I could about food. Food was something that always came easy to me because I chose to meet at the table of my peers. No one ever said no to McDonald's or going out for Italian. Back then, it wasn't necessarily about the food. It was about the meal that we had shared. However, now, I've begun to open up to the idea of sharing and cooking Viet and Asian food. I've grasped the confidence to ask my peers to meet me at my table. These new stories I've developed, fueled by the genuine curiosity and love for the food of my people of those around me today, have gradually begun to overshadow the trauma-filled stories I incurred at the elementary school lunch table. As I've explored the food stories of my people, I learned something that helped me reframe the reconciliation of my identity between the half that's whitewashed and the half that's attempting to reclaim every bit of color possible. What I've discovered is that all food is fusion. Now, when I say fusion, most of you will picture sushi pizza or Korean burritos. But what I'm talking about lies at a much more fundamental level. Food evolves and changes with the migration and movement of populations. Look, I know the phrase fusion food is almost as bad as cultural foodie, but please, allow me to explain. A perfect example of this is pho. And for those of you that aren't hip yet, pho is a rice noodle soup with a broth made of beef bones and lots of herbs and spices, slow cooked for hours, sometimes overnight. Pho originated in the late 19th century during the French colonial occupation of Vietnam. Chefs combined the French use of beef bones and broth making with rice noodles that were originally Chinese in origin to produce the earliest versions of pho. Later, after the split between North and South Vietnam, those that moved south began to use ingredients more commonly found in that region, developing pho into the more lavish and well-rounded dish commonly served today. After the fall of Saigon in 1975, Vietnamese refugee parents, like my parents, immigrated to all parts of the world, sharing their stories and recreating their versions of their pho. Today, the children of these same refugees are taking culinary risks, producing new versions of pho, and propelling and adapting the dish into beautifully unknown territory. Interestingly enough, like pho, my family is fusion through and through. For so long, I didn't understand this. I used to get mad every time I had to translate for my parents at the cash register. I got angry every time that my parents cooked while my friends were over. Just as food has evolved, fused, and transformed over the centuries, so have our families and communities. This realization has helped me begin to understand that it's just as hard for my parents to have American children as it is for me to have foreign parents. The fusion of food and people is built upon painful discoveries and enlightening conversations. Ma, Ba, I'm so sorry it took me this long to hear your stories. We are what we eat. Food is tied so closely to identity that I believe we can learn from the adaptations the dishes of our people have made over generations. Most of us from the contemporary immigrant community tend to forget that we come from thousand-year histories, filled with turbulence, long before the existence of Ellis Island. We too have continuously adapted to our environment, and adding the new ingredient of the beautifully ugly American dream is no different. And as much as I hate the sentimental construct, my parents did not escape a war-torn country across hemispheres for me to dilute the richness of our history. Now I've begun to approach my identity much differently. Instead of passively attending to the curiosity of my peers, I'm actively contending with the food of my people. My gateway I've started building to my own heritage. Now I'm on an odyssey to find the best pho in Columbus. I'm sharing with my friends the food that my mom packs into my bags whenever I visit home. I'm starting a tech food company to help preserve immigrant food culture, and now I'm here at TEDx, giving a talk about my identity, which is honestly crazy. What I found is that the feelings that have produced my imposter syndrome aren't something to necessarily be ashamed of. The existence of those feelings is proof that I'm actively thinking about and reflecting on my identity, which is far more than what the heartbroken boy at the front of the classroom could have ever dreamed of. For me, it has always been those small encounters at the restaurant or kitchen table, those momentary conversations filled with delicious food and beautifully rich stories. And stories are what make food a meal. What I started to do is by no means easy. I'm still working on it and have so many unanswered questions. But as the lunchbox generation, we're all still young. Food has given me so much more than I could have ever hoped for. So please, believe me when I say that there's a reason why food should always be a meal. Thank you.